All right, folks, we'll get started. So good evening, everyone. I usually don't sit like a news broadcaster, but I understand there's some folks at home, so I'm properly positioned for the TV. Hello to anybody in TV land. Thanks for coming out tonight. Come on in. And so tonight we're having the first of two public meetings where we're going to be talking about the Eastern States Steel site, say that 3 times fast, and the former Precise Engineering site over on Cook and West, so West Union. So tonight is really just about getting this conversation started. We'll share a little bit of what we know, and I'll introduce myself and talk a little bit about our team, but we're going to share what we've learned about the site. But already I've had a couple of conversations here where we're learning a lot from you all. A lot of you folks are probably in the neighborhood. You've been living around these sites for a long time. You can tell us stories about what you know, the conditions of the sites, and we can talk about how to try to move the ball forward on getting these sites redeveloped at some point and what some of the challenges are around that going forward. So, Charlie, if you could advance the slide, please. So anyway, my name is Nate Kelly. I'm a principal planner with a consulting firm called Horsley Witten Group. Later on, you'll meet my colleague, Gary Hedman, who's what the industry calls a licensed site professional. So his expertise is in site remediation and cleanup and those sorts of things. But I'll get in a little bit more into that. But tonight's purpose, as I mentioned, is to really talk about what we've learned, talk about where these sites stand today. Hey folks, come on in. And give you some context in terms of, again, what this process is all about, how sites get redeveloped, where the town stands right now with these properties, talk about those constraints, talk about the opportunities, and then looking forward, how do we move this forward, and what are sort of the steps along the way. Next slide, please. So again, just by way of introduction, East Bridgewater received funding from Mass Development. Mass Development is a state-level organization, and as the name suggests, they're interested in developing land in a way that helps local communities and also helps the state. And they have an interest in redevelopment. They have an interest in helping communities like East Bridgewater. 2 of Mass Development representatives are here tonight, just to help us move along, and you can ask them questions about their organization. But they they engage with consultants like Horsley Witten Group to provide technical assistance. So this funding allows Gary and myself and others that we'll talk about to come to the town and kind of help you move incrementally along. What you'll learn tonight and what you may already know is that these projects are complicated. There's a lot of layers, they take a lot of time, and so getting funding every step along the way is really important, and that's where Mass Development sort of steps in with their technical assistance programs. Next slide, please. So our team, again, obviously the town of East Bridgewater is leading this. Mass Development, as I mentioned, Horsley Witten Group, and if you come to the next public meeting, you'll meet someone from Union Studio. Union Studio is an architecture firm. So when we get to the point when we want to start thinking about what could happen on this site, Union Studio helps us with these kinds of projects to draw pictures, draw sketches, and sort of help you think about, I like this, I don't like that, this looks great, but maybe change that. And so their visualization skills and their architectural expertise sort of helps us all have that, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. It really helps the conversation go along. Next slide, please. So overall, the project purpose, it's a small project. It's only going to take us, sort of into the winter here, but we're going to provide as clear an understanding as we can of what's going on with these sites. And that sounds easy at a glance, but I think when you see some of the stuff that we've been getting into, you realize just establishing a basic understanding of site conditions can be really complicated. So that's part of what we're working on. We're going to use our findings. We'll talk tonight about what we've learned so far, talk about what we know, what we don't know, and you can help us fill in some of the gaps, I'm sure. And then eventually we're going to develop a roadmap on how we move forward. So next slide, please, Charlie. This slide is not meant to be read necessarily, but shows you part of what's complicated about this. One of Gary's favorite tasks that we hand him often is we hand him a stack of reports. You can see 16 reports listed there, and he and his team sift through those to read all the data about the remediation history of the site. What's been done, where are the gaps, what's been learned, what remains to be learned going forward. And so we've read through those, and one of the things that we're going to post on the project website is as concise a summary as we could come up with. It's pretty technical material, but again, part of our task is to make that as accessible to you as we can, because we don't expect all of you to sit down and read through 16 reports and hundreds of pages. So we try to make that a little bit more accessible and provide some summaries about, again, what's been done, what hasn't been done, and what we think you need to do going forward. So, that's part of the message here tonight, is that there's a lot we know and there's a lot we don't know in terms of the site remediation and the contamination that's there now. I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please, Charlie. And again, just to provide some local context, East Bridgewater did recently complete the community's master plan back in 2024, and these sites are mentioned. So it's not like this is new. This is something I'm sure all of you have been thinking about for a while, and you've probably been to some community discussions, or you've been to the coffee shop or the local bar and talked about these sites. This has been on people's mind for a while, and the opportunity to redevelop these sites is a priority, which of course is reinforced by the fact that the state's providing funding to try to help move this along. Potential reuse of this site could include a number of different things, but the things that have been discussed at local meetings include mixed use, so a mix of commercial and residential. Part of what we're trying to figure out is, well, what does that really look like, or what could that look like, and what's the scale? How much are we talking about, and what are the limitations? And I'll get into a little bit of that. It is important to note that there's always a financial, like a market reality behind all of this. You've all probably heard national news, statewide news, local news. The strongest market right now in real estate, bar none, is housing. So that is kind of an important thing that's in the backdrop here, is when we're looking at redeveloping this, and when the day comes that developers do come to the table, maybe things could change at that point. Right now, the real estate market is really hottest, unquestionably, with housing. Next one, Charlie. So a look at precise engineering. So precise engineering is the one that still has the building on it, right? So those of you who may have ever accessed the site, or you can sort of see when you drive by when the leaf cover is not there. But this was a manufacturing site for quite some time, beginning primarily back in the 1920s. I mean, the rail line next to it goes back into the mid-late 1800s. So that's been active for a long time. But the manufacturing really cropped up here on precise engineering in 1920s, but continued, for a good, 7 decades. With the site's about 2.5 acres. The zoning right now is business zoning, is a B5 zoning, consistent with the area. And it is walking distance. That's something that's going to come up again and again as I go through this. So the fact that it's walking distance to sort of your historic center there really does make it a nice fit for maybe potentially people to live there in the future. People who live there won't only be residents, but they'll be customers, right, for any of the businesses that are in the downtown. So that's a nice fit. Next slide, please, Charlie. It'll come. There we go. So just a few things to talk about. The site is contaminated. The history of manufacturing there, the history of material storage, has created a legacy, an unfortunate legacy of contamination. So soil, building materials, and groundwater all show various types of contamination. That's something that Gary can talk a little bit more about when we get into our Q&A. Chlorinated volatile organic compounds, heavy metals, PCBs, a pretty good laundry list of contamination at various levels have been documented on this site. Importantly, the last round of samples was back in 2017. So it's been 9 years since this site has produced any new data, which is an important piece. I mean, 9 years isn't forever. The data is still meaningful, but things can happen in 9 years. Pollutants can mobilize, pollutants can be diluted. So it is important. One of the next steps I'll talk about is sort of kindling the sampling and bringing that data up to date. Site remediation is tricky business, and you really have to understand, they call it characterization. You really have to understand how much you have, where it's located, is it in groundwater, is it in soil, is it in building materials, because the strategy that you choose to remediate, to clean things up, has to be specific to that situation. So the data, the sampling is really important. Groundwater is really shallow as well. That's an important constraint that'll come up a few times in my discussions. So that affects development, that affects remediation. When that groundwater comes right up underneath the surface, how you can clean and how you can develop, that's a constraint that's really important. From an infrastructure perspective, right now, there's no sewer service to this site, but some of you may have been involved in local discussions. The town is looking at potentially extending sewer service into the town center area. So that is a potentially important thing, because I talked about those groundwater levels. If you put a septic system in there and you try to drain a septic system into that groundwater, you have to mound that thing 5 feet, 6 feet out of the ground. It's very costly. It soaks up a lot of the site area. It takes up a lot of real estate. If you can bring sewer service to this site, that really kind of helps open up some of the developability of the site. You're not dealing with the groundwater anymore. You're just putting things in a pipe and it's going to a treatment plant. The groundwater issue, again, stormwater, right? So water falls on rooftops, water falls on pavement, it runs off. And even on the cleanest sites, stormwater carries pollutants. Every time we park our car, a little drip of oil comes out. Every time we tap our brakes, a little bit of metals comes out. Every time we walk the dog, the dog does its business. And so every time it rains, it washes that away. And so we got to treat that stormwater. And a lot of places like to put that back in the ground. That's a good way to treat it, get it in the ground, and let nature do its thing. When groundwater is right up against the surface, that kind of makes that a little more complicated. It's not that you can't do it, it's just you have to think about how you apply this. So again, from an infrastructure perspective, it's a little complicated, but not insurmountable. Some of the site features that I did mention, you've got a building on site, and that building has hazardous materials in it right now. So if you're tearing down a building that was built in 1980, that's one thing. That material is generally clean. You can take that off and dispose of it without much, without much fuss. If this site, when this building is taken down and those materials have to be taken off site, you can't dispose of that in sort of that ordinary fashion. Those materials have to be disposed of in a careful way, in a way that adds costs. You have to select the site, to do that. There are candidate sites. There's a whole process to that, and the bottom line is that it adds costs to the redevelopment. A bullet that we have up here is, there's a sort of a drainage ditch in the back, and one of the questions I had walking in here tonight is that a stream? and I got some clarification, is that it's probably an intermittent stream. So it's a stream that'll flow occasionally. So we were out there when there was still some snow on the ground. So when the 3 feet of snow had melted, that water was flowing. It was really going. I walked past it today. I didn't go on. I wasn't able to go on site today, but it's pretty much bone dry. So that's what they call an intermittent stream. It'll flow when the groundwater comes up in the spring and the snow melts and it rains. You'll probably get some sustained flow there. And then in August, in the middle of a drought, it'll dry up. So sort of seasonal thing, and that is something that's going to have to be looked at. Next slide, please, Charlie. So again, some of the strengths here. I talked about some of the challenges they face with this site. I mentioned that proximity to downtown and the local zoning is favorable you probably don't have to consider a zoning change or much of a zoning change in order to achieve what you want. There's going to be future wastewater capacity if everything moves forward as planned. Site features, it's relatively flat, right? So if you want to redevelop this site, you don't have to do a lot of site work. That was done decades ago. The site's nice and flat. And I'll talk a little bit about there's some stone slabs out there now that could potentially create an opportunity, depending on what we learn about those. So that is a sort of a quick summary of precise engineering. I'm going to move on, and then we'll do a little Q&A afterwards. So run right through this. Over to Eastern State Steel. We're next door, right? We just went across the train tracks. We're over on Eastern State Steel. This was a manufacturing site beginning back in the 1880s, from what we can tell. It's a bit bigger. So this is a little over 4 acres, where Precise is 2.5. This is a bit over 4. Zone B5, same zoning designation, walking distance to downtown. Next slide, please, Charlie. So some of the same story, right? We're right next door. It's contaminated, and there's a sort of long legacy here. Last sampling completed in 2017, so our data are not up to date, useful, but not up to date. And then some of the foundry waste is used as site fill, contributing to the contamination. So there's a lot of what happened with these sites is, back before we had the proper controls in place, is sometimes toxic material was brought in from off-site. They reused toxic material to fill holes. So that history, you're sort of unraveling that, and you're often learning as you go. Again, those investigations, digging data, all really important. The same infrastructure issues apply with the lack of sewer and the challenges for stormwater drainage. There is a large concrete slab on site. This was the foundation for the previous, and you can see we have a photo up here that shows where that was. You can see some in the historic aerial photos. So that slab is out there, and that could be both an opportunity or a constraint. One of the things I learned from my colleagues like Gary is, for folks like you and me, when we look at a concrete slab, we think that's a concrete slab. It doesn't get harder or more impervious than that. For an LSP who deals with contamination and remediation, they look at a concrete slab like a sponge. And so depending on how that site was used, depending on the activities that took place, that contamination can seep into a concrete slab. And so it could either be an asset or a liability, depending on how it was used before. And we don't really have the answer to that. But it could, like I said, I'll talk a little bit later, like that area, when you're thinking in the future and you're redeveloping, that area could become a parking area. Like that might be an ideal use for that particular part of the site, where you just sort of recover that, and so it presents an opportunity in that way if we're smart about it. Hazardous building materials have been detected on the site. One of the things we didn't expect, and those of you who have been on the site know this, is that there's a big rubble pile on this site, sort of at the back end. You can see when they demolished the building, you sort of you can envision that whatever bulldozers they had just sort of pushed a lot of the foundation, a lot of the brickwork into a big pile, right? So that big pile could be dirty, could be contaminated, we don't know. But either way, it has to be disposed of, and so that's just another sort of issue that we have to deal with. Next slide, please. A lot of the same strengths and opportunities apply here that I talked about earlier. Proximity to downtown, future wastewater capacity. I didn't talk much about the MBTA right-of-way, so that's that sort of corridor that splits these two sites. As far as we can tell, and folks can confirm, we think all of that infrastructure has been pulled out of this stretch. So one of the things that we sometimes worry about on these sites is that the railroad ties and the rails themselves may still be in place. Those materials can be difficult to dispose of. As far as we can tell, they're gone, which would be great. Like that's some positive news. So that MBTA right-of-way could be used to extend a bike path or a trail or make an interior kind of roadway in there. So again, an existing site feature that produces an opportunity. Next slide, please, Charlie. So when we were thinking about development, and again, this is really at 30,000 feet, just looking at what we know, what you see here is there are areas where we think it's probably unlikely, or we have questions about whether or not we can develop there. So starting from the right, there's the most obvious is the building, right? So that building has to be demoed. That building has to be removed before you can ever think of developing anything in that particular area. There's a smaller circle right underneath that that's a question mark. So again, we were out there in very wet conditions after snow melt, and that particular area of the site was soaking wet, standing water. That could have been unique to the snowfall melt, or that may be an area of the site that is often soggy. And if that's the case, that could be a constraint to development. That's kind of a question mark for us. The larger red oval over on Eastern States Steel, that's where the slab is and the rubble pile. So you can't really see it in that particular photo because of the leaf litter that's all over it. Just sort of years and years of leaves dropping on it have covered it over. But that's another question mark for us, as I mentioned. We don't know if that's an asset. We don't know if that's a liability. We need to learn more about the condition of that concrete and whether or not it's been contaminated. And then the MBTA, we've got that as sort of a red dashed line because we're not going to develop on that. That could become an important site feature, but we don't think that's a place where, because of ownership issues and easement issues, we think that particular corridor is probably better left undeveloped as we look forward. And so kind of what that leaves at this point is that area that is sort of a slanted rectangle up there in blue. So that's an area of the site that, from what we can tell at this point, questions still need to be answered. There wasn't a lot of activity in this particular area historically. We don't think that this area was subjected to a lot of contamination. The other piece of this is that it's, fronting right on West Union. So if I were just a developer and wanted to put a building somewhere, this is where I'd want to put it. If you said, which area do you want to build first? That's where I'd point to, because I want my businesses, I'd want my homes on that street, across from the post office, with the downtown, within walking distance. That's really the right spot. So one of the things that we're going to do when we come to the next meeting and I bring our architects is she will show some different development concepts, and we're going to focus on that area for now. We think that's the most likely to be developed, even if, by some ideal situation, the whole site were to become available for development. That would still be the priority area for those other factors that I mentioned. So, we'll take a look at that as we go forward. Again, we want to hear more from you and learning about what you may know about that area that we don't know. But that's what we're thinking at this point. Next slide, please, Charlie. Other way. There we go. Yep. So like I said, we're going to bring in some development sketches. We're going to work on those, over the next month or so. We'll, bring forward some different ideas of what buildings could look like, give you a sense of, again, scale, how big, how much, so we get to sort of start to talk about those questions. Next slide, please. So those are the next step for this project. Thinking about the next steps longer term. So there's still a lot of work to be done before these sites can be developed. They need to be cleaned up. In order to be cleaned up, we need to learn more about really getting into the details. Where's the contamination? What type of contamination is in different spots? How much? And therefore identify a path forward to getting all of these different areas cleaned up and ready to go. I will say, unfortunately, funding for this has tightened a lot. So the town recently submitted an application for brownfields. Brownfields is another word for a contaminated site. For brownfields cleanup, and those are run by EPA region. So EPA region 1 is where we live, and that's kind of New England and into the New York area. Our understanding, anecdotally, is that only about 25% of the applications were funded. Charlie's going to get a debrief next Monday from EPA. There's going to be a call where they talk about the application. It was not funded. So this round, the town was not successful. It's incredibly competitive, and we think the application, by all accounts, was strong. But that's part of, again, the purpose of this project is that when we're done with this and we have sketches and we have a report that can get tacked on to the next application, it just makes it stronger. So sometimes you gotta put in a little extra effort in order to get that prize. But that's where that particular piece is. The other critical piece that I mentioned is the sewer extension. So that's ongoing work. Charlie can probably answer questions about that when we get into the Q&A. But that's a multi-year study/project. But that, again, showing that as part of a brownfield application, that just keeps elevating it. So this is really about perseverance with these sites, is just continuing to go at it, continuing to, step by step elevate these products. I work on other projects with mass development, and right now we're finishing one up in Merrimack, Massachusetts. And they're just, they're at that next step. They're, 5 years, 6 years ahead of you all. So, they're moving to the point where they're gonna seriously they're gonna put out an RFP. They're gonna sell these sites, and so they're there. So it works. This process works. It takes a lot of perseverance, but it's happening all over the Commonwealth, and East Bridgewater can get this done as long as we keep at it. So that's my presentation. I will invite Gary up. Charlie, I don't know if you want to join me as well, and we can just take questions, have a discussion with you all. I appreciate it. Thank you. Who wants to start us off? Yes, sir.
What are they looking to put on this site here? Is it going to be industry? Is it going to be apartment skyscrapers? What's it going to be? Because this town here can't take any more traffic up at the set of lights and stuff. It's a disaster up there.
I sat in that traffic today. It was something.
You don't have to worry because you're not in this town.
we have to worry about it because we need to make it a successful proposal. The challenge for the town is if we're going to be getting funding from other sources besides the town itself. And for instance, the grant application that we filed with the EPA last spring, the one that was rejected this fall or this summer, was for $800,000. We don't have $800,000 sitting in our own coffers to spend on cleaning up the site. It's probably going to be more than that, but let's call it $800,000. If we want to get federal and or state money, and right now we're not eligible for any state grants, we're only eligible for federal, we have to provide them with a rationale of why they should spend the money here in East Bridgewater cleaning up the site versus all the other sites. As mentioned, only 1 out of 4, and it was even worse in New England, but 1 out of 4 nationwide got a grant. So what they're going to look for is saying, what are we getting back? What's going to be there? As your same question you're asking, that makes sense for the federal government to provide that money. And we would say, and it was mentioned, could we do a mixed development? Well, it works if there is a commercial need there. But we have storefronts in the center of town right now that are vacant. So there's going to be a question of if you build it, they will come? Maybe. Housing, we know there's a need for it. And I understand much of the town is against the town participating in any housing project. So there's the conundrum. If we want money, we're going to need to do something with that property that makes sense to the folks who are giving us the money. We've had people, for instance, also mention building a solar farm. Let's assume that we can get the site cleaned up and build a solar farm, it gets about a megawatt it's not very large. It's not as large, for instance, as the Bridge Street landfill in terms of acreage. So is it going to be a large enough parcel to attract someone who would make the commitment to build that solar farm? Simply building it and leaving it alone, if we want to spend the money and do that, that's a possibility. But it's less likely that any federal or state agency will support our project if all we're going to do is just do the cleanup and not do anything with the site.
Yeah, just say that the center's a mess.
Yeah.
Try coming down Central Street, taking a left. They should have a left light, an arrow, taking a left. They don't, and you're there for 3 or 4 times.
Right.
And the lights change before you can even take a left.
And the problem for the town is Route 18 is a MassDOT road, Massachusetts Department of Transportation. And in terms of, it sounds weird that we have fewer accidents there at Central and Bedford Street than we do up at Highland or do at East-West. But that's the data right now. And so the priority that MassDOT has said in terms of making changes at various intersections along Route 18, they see it as more important to work on East-West and Highland than the one at Central. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying, again, MassDOT would say to us, if you have enough money to make the changes there and they meet the MassDOT stipulations and requirements, then fine, spend the money. But again, how much money do you want to spend fixing the intersection?
I have a question about the sewage system. Would we be connected to Brockton?
No, this would be, we have a sewer line right now that serves the school system in Town Hall. That line crosses the street in the carriage crossing stores and then going up to CVS. That's where the line ends right now. The idea is we have enough capacity that we could extend the line to some of the properties along in the central area there, either at the corner there between Central and Union, or, for instance, farther down Union, for instance, for these properties. It's not limitless, but it is something that we could do based on the capacity that we have for this sewer system. Again, obviously that costs money. We're not doing it tomorrow. There was a study done last year to, in fact, determine what we could be able to do and what path we might follow for the line and everything like that, but we're nowhere near bringing the sewer line in. It's not next week or next month. we're still working as the Brockton line, one farther north on North Bedford Street. We're hoping to have that up and running by the end of the year. This would be something that, the DPW and the Select Board, Finance Committee, and everyone else would then have to consider, okay, again, it goes back to, we can build it, where's the money coming from? Because we got a lot of state and federal money, majority of the money, in fact, for the sewer line to Brockton is coming from the federal and state governments, not from the town. We'd have to look and see how we would finance that line and do the extension.
I know the sewer that they have there now at the school, that place is a mess. Have you ever gone in there?
I have not gone in there myself. It was a mess a year ago. We got a new sewer superintendent. I would recommend that if you feel that it's still a mess, to make an appointment for a visit there with the new
The
superintendent.
company I worked for, Veolia Water, went in there because they wanted them to take it over. They says, no way, this place is a complete mess.
And I agree with you.
Lights hanging from the ceiling.
I agree with you. It was a complete mess, and we have a new company that has come in, working with our DPW. I strongly recommend you give them a call and make an appointment for a visit there, and you can take a look at it now.
Could you explain to me what zoning B5 means?
So I don't have the zoning law in front of me, but it's a business use, so there would be a list
It was
of.
rezoned 7, 8, 9 years ago to be taken out of heavy industrial, which is what it was, to be some fancy overlay district.
Well, I wasn't here 7 or 8 years ago, but
Overlay?
I would go back,
MBT overlay you're talking about.
No.
No.
well,
No, that's,
so I would,
But one of the reasons I bring it up is one of the prohibited uses in that overlay district is the solar farm. It's prohibited. You can't put one in.
but then,
That's not-
again,
You can't put a daycare in there. I mean, there's a lot of things.
but you,
Just a list.
but if if the town said, well, this is what we want to do, the town meeting could vote to rezone.
Again,
Yeah, yeah.
now 95 and, not 95, 18 and Central.
Feels like
Well,
95.
That was all, yeah. Feels like that was all reconfigured 10 or 15 years ago, as was the intersection at Union, West Union, Central, and North Central. That's all already been done once, so I can certainly see why they're looking at Highland and East and West. Because they've already spent their money there. We're done with that project, boom. So, yeah, it is a problem, the way it is now. Will the abutters get sewerage?
Well, again, this is the thing, is there's a limit to what we have. And there's no plan, there's no specific plan saying only these properties are getting it. That hasn't been worked out, but there will be a limit as to how many properties the sewer line can connect to, because it's a capacity limit, which we can't raise that amount.
Okay, we talked about the sewer, how about water?
Hang on, just with this gentleman had his hand up.
Sorry.
Who does the testing? Who did the sampling in 2016? Is that scheduled again, and who pays for that? Is that data even effective really for your analysis? Being 9 years old, that seems like it's almost
So-
obsolete.
As part of any cleanup project, you would do the testing again.
We would, East Bridgewater would?
Well, as part, who need the money.
Yeah.
Let's say the feds give us $800,000. Part of that 800,000 is go back and make sure, what's there now and where is it?
So did our application last year provide 9-year-old data? Did that hurt our application?
Well, because that's what we have available to us.
So did that hurt our application, I'm saying, was that data was obsolete? So
I wouldn't,
not really-
no, it's not obsolete.
No.
It's worth, to a certain extent, saying at least we know what was there
Well,
9
that's
years
fair.
ago.
Yeah.
And I can speak to the question of whether or not it's obsolete. So typically, the contaminants that we're talking about are known as persistent contaminants, metals, PCBs, PAHs. These things don't break down over time. They stay here. That's why they are complicating the development of these sites. We have a pretty good understanding of the soil quality here. The data that is most likely to have changed over the last 10 years is the groundwater quality. Both of these sites are located within the zone of contribution to the town's municipal well, Zone 2, right? That well is tested regularly, and I don't know of any issues that could be attributed to this site. I mean, that's just how it works.
So that's good news.
Right, you're drinking municipal water,
Yep.
you have reason to believe that it is tested regularly and that it's meeting state standards, right? So the soil characterization, I would say, is fairly robust over the 40-some-odd years that these investigations have gone on. EPA did a fairly significant cleanup here in 2000, 2001, where they took off some 300 tons of PCB impacted soil, and then they capped the sites with about 10 inches of clean fill material. That isn't to say that future redevelopment wouldn't require some additional sampling of soil. It would need to be done not only to characterize the risk that still remains and kind of update what we already know, but it would also be necessary to support, whether or not we're going to ship some of that soil off for disposal, whether or not it's clean enough that we can cap it on site. Maybe we could consolidate it underneath a parking lot or underneath a building. We, in our existing conditions memo, point out the fact that the most recent data is 10 years old. I don't think that was necessarily a factor in EPA's decision.
And the yellow lines are property lines, or are those contamination lines?
Those are property lines.
So the contamination probably goes beyond the yellow lines, it's at the top on property lines, right?
So I am aware of off-site testing that was done. I can't recall the dates, but several abutters, there was sampling done. The impacts are understood to be limited to the sites themselves. I mean, that's where the soil is now, right? The groundwater issue has been looked at by multiple consultants, most recently Ransom, and they've put in several of their reports that there's no reason to believe that there's impacts off-site from that groundwater.
And you mentioned a minute ago, I'm sorry, one last question. We're not eligible for state funding, only
Correct.
federal funding?
Right.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, we are not MBTA compliant. The town voted 3 times not to pass the MBTA zoning, and that says, as far as,
Ineligible.
we're not going to get grants.
Thank you.
2001, they tested the soil, and mine directly downstream from the corner on Cook Street. And all the water off would come towards me, and that ditch that you were referring to as a dry stream most of the time. And they tested my property, and what they found was nothing. Evidently what's there is, does not migrate, is what they told me. I don't know about any of the other properties, but I know 85 and 99 were tested. 85 and 99 Brook Street. And nothing had migrated from that property.
Thank you. Did you have your hand up, Miss?
Me?
Yeah, I thought I saw you raise your
I have
hand.
a question. When first the presentation came up, it listed the different, I don't want to point to people, but you and them, but it didn't list the EPA as being part of the team, and that needs to be part of the team, so you are working closely with them.
So the reason I did it is because EPA is not part of our project team, right? The town is certainly working with EPA separate from us.
When
So-
we apply for a
Yeah.
grant application, for instance, obviously.
I'm just asking because I've lived here for 47 years, and when they cleaned that up, I talked to the people from the EPA, and they told me after they did the cleanup that they could do, that it was going to be a slab or a parking lot, and that's it. And now we're going to dig up the soil, and I'm concerned about it. And it's very contaminated. I read the 100-page report. I read it all. I know it's in there.
I can speak to that. So since that time, the evolution of site cleanup, the evolution of our regulations, the requirements that are placed on contractors during site, during excavation, right? We're monitoring air. This stuff is going to regulated facilities. Things are being done in a much more diligent fashion than they were being done some 20, not to mention 40 years ago. This is also something that 40 years ago probably predates the Brownfields program in its entirety, if I'm not mistaken. So somewhere along the path of us realizing that these sites weren't going to go anywhere unless we actually took action and started cleaning them up. There's been a whole host of regulations, and Massachusetts really leads the nation with regards to the program that they have set up for cleaning up, assessing, remediating contaminated sites. Other states have modeled their programs to follow ours, and it's because we were kind of the birthplace, of the Industrial Revolution, right? So we have a lot of sites that are just like these across the Commonwealth. And other municipalities, other towns, other cities have been successful in undertaking projects like this, but it takes a long-term vision. And 40 years ago, or 20 years ago, that may have been kind of the thinking at the time, that this was only going to be a parking lot. I can speak from personal experience that I've seen worse sites than this redeveloped for utility substations, for parking facilities, for kind of mixed-use facilities. It all comes with a cost, though. Disposing of this soil, just, remediating these sites has a hefty price tag to it.
And another concern I had was talk about things going into the groundwater. It might be dry now, but I've lived here for many, many years. It's dry here now, 2 streets up. There's a wetland on one side and again across the street, and all those drain into a river that travels across Spring Street this way and down this way over to Central Street. And my concern is getting appropriate cleanup with the EPA so that things like that don't happen to contaminate the soil and to contaminate our water in the rivers that are left there.
Yeah, and again,
Because that affects everybody in the town, not just the people who live
without
on the
question,
street.
and that's why that characterization piece is so important. It's the data. Like, there is a possible world where an incredibly comprehensive sampling program occurs on this site, and it comes back and says, we really can't do much. That could happen. We have to do the sampling, we have to gather the data. There is a world where they do the sampling and it comes back more positive. That's actually, we think we can do some things here, and this is, it's surgical. You really have to do this sort of meter by meter through these sites. So there's a lot to learn on that.
I also think that, when and if the town is able to do the cleanup, it's not going to be done without a lot of community involvement, not just about future uses, but the actual cleanup of the site. So that if we get to a cleanup situation, we're going to be having meetings like these, so abutters, neighbors, anyone else who's interested can be here, talk to the people who are doing the actual cleanup and work through, okay, how are you doing this? How are you doing that? How are you going to prevent what you've mentioned from happening? So that you'll get the information and get your questions answered. We're nowhere near there yet, obviously, because we don't have any money to do that. But again, one of the parts of the grant process and part of the application is you have to specifically lay out how are you going to involve the community. You can't just ignore them. They have to be part of that process in order for a grant to be funded.
Is Union Architects, were they part of Horsley Witten?
They're an independent firm, but we partner with them all the time. We do a lot of these projects together because we're more the science and the planning and the zoning, and they're the design folks. So when it comes time to sort of, get out of the reports and think about the future, they help us a lot with that.
How long has your firm been involved in the project?
Oh, when did we start, Claire? Was this, Charlie, this was,
It's been more than a year.
it's been more than, about a year.
Because it took some time to work with Mass Development, and work out exactly what we're going to be doing through Mass Development. We're actually not getting the money. Mass Development has the money, and Mass Development is paying all the participants in this. It's more of a sort of a technical assistance grant where money stays with the state, but they fund the actual project on behalf of the town. But we've been working, for instance, one of the things that's been happening, we have the sewer line as an idea, Eastern State Steel, a couple of years ago, we were near foreclosure on that property. We're getting much closer, so we got to involve Eastern State Steels as an additional property.
I will note, though, that Horsley Witten actually, in 1997, was actually part of some of the initial site investigations that went on here, just from a historical perspective. So,
We're back.
yeah.
Is it fair to say that any funding, you're saying the funding would come from the feds?
Or the state, if we were eligible again, yes.
That they would not be interested in just cleaning up that site and making it green space? They're looking for...
If they had an infinite amount of money, the answer would be yes. But they don't. So they're going to pick and choose which projects they want to clean up on various criteria, one of which is they want to see those sites developed and not necessarily just be turned into green space. Doesn't mean that it's a wrong use, but if they have a choice between cleaning up a site and creating jobs or creating housing, and cleaning up a site and not have any of that, they're going to tend to pick the projects where there's going to be a new use for the site. It's going to produce either jobs, housing, or both.
Yeah, to Gary's point, the unfortunate reality is that we live in Massachusetts and I'm from Rhode Island, and these sites are everywhere. So there's a long line of people in the queue who are looking for this funding.
I mean, if the town wanted to fund it itself, then the town can make its own choice about how the properties are going to be developed or not developed. But again, that would be bringing an article to town meeting, whether it's for 800,000 or some larger figure to get the work done, versus all the other priorities the town has.
Can I ask you? So would part of the plan be that you get the federal funding and you show them what you're gonna do, and then you get the state funding because you're gonna build MBTA housing there, and then the state will give you the grant that you want?
Well,
Compliant?
you'd have, we'll work through a couple of things. The federal could be, again, a combination of jobs and housing, whatever, or one or the other of them. The MBTA, if we ever got ourselves into compliance, it doesn't mean that that district or those parcels have to be within the MBTA overlay. The original proposal a couple of years ago included them. The second and third times we went to town meeting, it did not include those parcels. So the state could give us money once we're in compliance for that project, but those parcels do not have to be within the overlay zone for us to get the money to clean up.
It's probably a long line for the state too, if there's a long line for the federal government.
Thank you.
But it sounds like it's worth beginning the process so that we're not stuck, that we can take our first steps.
It is a long process.
Yes.
And at this point, I think you think about the cost of doing nothing, like you said, of getting stuck. You have these properties, you have this legacy of contamination. If you develop this vision and you can secure this, something completely new could happen. I mean, the world changes fast, right? And just imagine what the world was like 8 years ago. This site gets cleaned up in 5 to 6 years from now, or 8 years from now. Who knows what the possibilities are? But then you're ready, right? That's kind of
And what this does, whether it's for state or federal funding, is it gives us, I won't say points in the sense of literal, we get 5 more points on an application, but it does provide a stronger application if we can show not necessarily just one possibility, but several possibilities for reuse of the site. Again, we're having a second meeting later this fall, later this year, which we will announce and publicize and everything again. And you'll start seeing some of the conceptual drawings of what might be possible based on what you've learned here tonight. What parts of the site we wouldn't touch, like the MBTA right-of-way, which has nothing to do with MBTA zoning. It's the old right-of-way for the rail line. And in fact, I know we have people here in East Bridgewater and surrounding communities that are looking to build a rail trail, which would include that section, which might make those parcels more attractive, both Eastern State Steel and Precise Engineering. But there are other parts of those two parcels where the various issues that were discussed would not work for major development or any development versus, okay, we can put a building here, but we can't put a building here. Maybe we put parking there, but not parking there. And you'll see some of those ideas come about when we meet again in the fall.
You keep throwing out this 5 to 8 year timeline. I know that it's a timeline, but is that a realistic timeline, 5 to 8 years, or just a timeline?
I would think so. I mean, Gary, you know more about this than I do, but if I sort of play it forward, you apply next year, you get funded, that process takes a year. You mobilize a contractor, you get all your funding in place, and then a plan is developed for the monitoring and all that stuff. That takes a year. Monitoring wells go in the ground. You don't want 2 to 3 years worth of data. You're at 4 to 5 years at that point. Maybe you were able to take the building down during that time, maybe not. So you can see you're at 5, 6, that sort of like moves along that time horizon. So it can be frustrating, right, to hear that. It's like, oh my goodness, like this wouldn't be developed for another 10 years. That's not unreasonable. But we're thinking about, the future. That's part of this. This is a long game, remediation and site redevelopment. Sometimes it happens very quickly when the money is there, right? In different circumstances, if it's like sort of a multi-million, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars project, that's not what we're talking about here, right? This is a smaller scale, site remediation in the grand scheme of things. But for East Bridgewater, I mean, this is a big deal, right? This is an important site. This is a big piece of land by your standards, right next to your town center. So important for the future, certainly.
We have a phrase, years in the planning, days in the doing, and we typically reserve it for projects like dam removals because overnight you can see the change on a site. A site like this, certainly it's been decades in the investigation of both sites, but once you reach the point where you're ready to effectively remediate the site, weeks to complete the soil removal, stabilize things, and get it to the point where you need to do where you need to be. They're not huge sites, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But to get to that point where you're ready to get shovels in the ground might take another couple of years. And there's, Ransom Consulting has provided a pathway for addressing the groundwater contamination of the site, which is separate from the soil and does need to be remediated eventually. So they have a kind of a bench scale test, and they've provided cost to the town on this. So again, something like that, probably to Nate's point, a year, maybe 2, to gauge the how effective those treatments are, and then some non-invasive long-term monitoring to make sure that the conditions are stable.
It took 150 years to create the problem, right? So it's like a little while to undo it.
15 years of
Well, as I said, we're going to have a second meeting this fall. I don't think we have a date yet.
We don't have a date yet.
But it will be this fall, within the next couple of months. We'll be putting it out on the town website with electronic sign. If it's time to write the newsletter, Facebook, all the usual places we try and publicize.
Within the next couple of weeks at most, probably sooner, we'll get at least a full draft of this existing conditions report that we've mentioned a couple of times. We wanted to hear from you tonight before we put the final touches on that, because we did learn a few things. So we want to make sure that that's in that report. But that's always our first step is, again, it's like, where are we now? What do we know? And so there's probably a 25-page report that'll go up on the website, which is on your flyer. So you'll be able to read that before bedtime, and we'll all be on the same page.
Great. Thanks very much for coming. Appreciate it.